Hello and welcome to the Emergency Services Times podcast, where you can hear the speakers who joined us on stage at the Emergency Services Show 2024. Making energy savings and cutting emissions across blue light estates. Tips, advice and insights. In this fireside chat, hear from Steph Parker, who shares her passion for tackling climate change and why it's not just a sustainability expert's job to green the workplace and help us all reach net zero.
So I've been in the energy sector since around 2019, working in primarily first government policy around commercial and industrial buildings, and then latterly for the last 2 years, just over 2 years and like 2 days, I've been at Energy Systems Catapult. Prior to that I worked in a kind of range of government policy, strategy and legislation roles, so really interested in how you kind of solve difficult problems and get things moving at that sort of strategic level.
Yeah, you were saying to me just now you're interested in the people perhaps more than the construction side of things.
Yeah, so net zero is a really interesting problem, particularly around estates decarbonisation, because we're trying to introduce new technologies in the public sector into predominantly very operational environments. These are kind of buildings that are delivering vital public services, so it's not just about technology implementation behind the scenes, it's about making these buildings fit for the purpose, making sure they're still delivering the operations they need to, as well as kind of reducing the carbon emissions. So it's a really interesting sort of people technology problem that I find that really interesting.
And just very quickly, why are you passionate about tackling climate change?
So I think you can't get away from, I think, it being the biggest challenge that we face as a society. And I just find that, I think, as individuals, we have a lot of role to play. There's things you can do in your own life that move you towards a sort of lower carbon way of living. But ultimately, we need systemic change and quite quickly, unfortunately, now. So I think being involved with that helps me get out of bed in the morning and kind of feel like what I'm doing during my working hours is really helping.
So you mentioned Energy Systems Catapult. Just tell us a bit about what that organisation does.
Yeah, sure. We're actually based not very far from here in Birmingham, so that's where our main office is, and we're about 250 people of kind of energy experts of various different types. I guess the most important thing to say is that we're a government-funded not-for-profit. So everything we do is around the transition from where we are now to net zero. And what we're measured on is our impact, so making real changes in the real world. It's a really fabulous organisation full of very smart and motivated people. We do quite a lot of work in the public sector.
And so some of that work is providing guidance. Just tell me a little bit about your decarbonisation guidance.
So the reason I'm here talking to you guys today is because we've got a big project that's funded by DESNZ that's around directly supporting the public sector to decarbonise their estates. This work started in around 2018, where we undertook an innovation project and worked with about 42 public sector sites across NHS, Ministry of Defence and Ministry of Justice. And over that programme, we were looking at the sites, working out how they could decarbonise, what technologies they might need to deploy and when. And in a smaller number of testbed sites, we also had a go at implementing some simple measures with the aim of learning how kind of easy or difficult it was to do these.
Easy?
More difficult than you'd like, I think, is the summary. So we learned an awful lot from that innovation programme, and then government didn't want to lose that learning and wanted to spread it across other public sector organisations. So what we've done is taken the learning from that and developed a suite of kind of free to access guides, tools, templates that you can download from our website to really help organisations speed up the decarbonisation on their sites and help them to avoid kind of making mistakes because they haven't thought about everything they need to think about, or save money from essentially better use of the supply chain. So we know that can be a bit of a problem, like the public sector engaging effectively with suppliers to take projects forward. So we really try to be user focused, so what your needs are and the problems you're facing, and also try to bridge that gap between maybe quite high-level strategy guidance around targets and when you need to decarbonise, and then the really detailed engineering guidance that's obviously really necessary, but there's a lot of people who sit in the middle who are potentially not engineers, they're sustainability managers, estate managers, and our guidance is really designed to help those people get to grips with the technologies and how they might go about decarbonising their buildings.
Can you just give us one or two examples of some of those like nitty-gritty
sure.
bits of guidance?
So the guidance is organised around 7 themes. The first theme is around strategy, but the second theme is about feasibility and design studies. Now, this is an area that we know people find challenging, particularly because most feasibility and design studies you will need to commission, expertise from the supply chain. So we've got a few guides on feasibility and design. We've got things in there like a flowchart that helps you decide whether you might need building audits, a specialist site survey, a desktop assessment. And then we've actually got a tool that you can kind of put in a few details and it'll produce you first draft procurement specifications. So if you want to go on and build a set of building audits, you don't have to kind of sit down from scratch and come up with your procurement spec. We've already done you a really good first draft. So we really try to be practical. A couple of the other topics that are really popular is we've got a guide around all the different types of heat pumps. So understanding air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, water source, what you need to think about when you're thinking about installing them, and also things like power purchase agreements. So that's another topic that people are very interested in, alternative ways of buying your electricity. So again, we've got a good kind of introductory guide to PPAs that would help someone take those first steps on understanding what they might need to do.
And just talking about those ground source heat pumps, I believe that you work with the Royal Geological Society. Is that
yes.
right? Survey.
Survey, yeah. So one of the things that initial innovation programme did with those 42 sites was threw up a lot of like cross-cutting issues that a lot of public sector organisations are going to face. And because we're not a sort of commercial organisation, we can take on projects that other people probably won't because there isn't a payback or there isn't a sort of revenue. And one of the problems that we noticed is that ground source heat pumps are often discounted as an option because it's quite expensive to work out whether you need whether you can have a ground source heat pump, because you have to drill and you have to sort of drill test boreholes essentially. So a lot of people were just ruling them out and going straight to air source. But actually ground source heat pumps in the long term, although they're more expensive to put in, they can be cheaper to run and better for particularly organisations like the NHS who have big sites, lots of electricity demand, lots of heat demand. So we worked with the British Geological Survey to put together a screening tool where essentially you can put some simple information in about your site and your location, and then it kind of matches you up with the sort of geological information and tells you how much heat you might be able to get out of the ground. So that's a tool that's being rolled out in the NHS at the moment, but is free to use and is available. And essentially that gives you a sort of go, no-go if you're considering getting a consultant in to look at your site. So hopefully things like that just make the journey a bit quicker.
Country.
So we've got below ground data at the moment just for England, because the initial build of the tool was funded by NHS England, but we're looking for funding to roll it out to Scotland and Wales, and also kind of expand the sort of ease of use of the tool for other public sector organisations.
Oh, fascinating. You recently wrote an article that I think is in the Emergency Services Times, so go and take a look at it, which talks about the expense of retrofitting basically sort of old fire stations, police stations. How do you tackle this issue of just the funding gap, basically?
Yeah, so this project sits us very closely to government. We work hand in hand with the policy team that look after Low Carbon Skills Fund and the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, which are essentially the two sort of main ways of getting grant funding for estate decarbonisation. Now, these funds are massively oversubscribed. I think about 1 in 8 applications for Low Carbon Skills Fund is funded. So there's clearly huge demand and not enough funding. So it is I wouldn't say it's the only barrier, but it is a significant one. So we did some survey work last year and some interviews, and we got real granularity about the challenges that funding was causing, that we were able to feed back into policymakers to help them think about the schemes and how they might develop. And it's quite an exciting opportunity now with a new government, so potentially there could be a rethink about how it's done.
So does your guidance help people apply for that funding?
So Salix Finance, who issue the funding, they have all the kind of application criteria and the forms, so they do the nitty-gritty of how you apply. But what our guidance does is helps you think about your whole programme from start to finish, so from strategy right through feasibility, thinks about procurement, funding. So if you look at our guidance and you it helps you think about what you need to do, you should be in a better place to apply for those grant funding schemes. You should have a more holistic understanding of your estate, thought about more factors, how the funding can fit in. So our guidance is sort of broader, I guess, but yes, it should
but it helps people know what they need to put in their application. And you mentioned the change of government, so why does that make you think that, more money might be available?
Well, I don't know about more money, because that's definitely not the mood music, but I think what's absolutely clear is a lot of public sector organisations are bound by Treasury rules about where they can get their funding from, and essentially they can only get it from taxpayers' money, so through the spending review, or they can get it through applying for grants. Now, we just know that the cost of decarbonising the whole of the public sector, I mean, how many just emergency services estates are there, let alone local authority buildings, NHS, Ministry of Defence, central government. I would be very surprised if that's ever going to be all funded from taxpayer revenue, because the costs are just, collectively so high. So I would argue that there's going to have to be a different approach, that they're going to have to think about private sector finance and how that might support the public sector. I would be surprised if new government isn't thinking about that. And I think, in fact, the Green Finance Institute, who are another sort of non-profit that look at green finance, clues in the name, their chief exec, I think, put out a press release around Labour's pledge around investment in green and said, actually, the private sector stands ready to invest. We've just got to work better together. So I think there's a few voices that are talking about a potentially different approach.
What incentive would there be for the private sector to invest in the public sector?
We're straying to the edge of my expertise here, but if you think about public sector organisations, they're large organisations that are enduring, so police forces, ambulance services don't just disappear like potentially businesses can. They own an awful lot of real estate, so if you look at the government's State of the Estate report, I think the last estimate was £515 billion worth of kind of government public sector estate. So given that as sort of decarbonisation technology advances and combinations of technology are looking like decarbonisation can save money over time, you would think there would be a way to put that together, that investors could invest in decarbonisation and returns come from cost savings. It's not straightforward, but there's definitely, we can't continue to just try and grant fund our way out of a huge problem, really.
And I know that you deal with estates rather than fleet vehicles.
Yeah.
But pretty much every talk today has been about the move towards electric vehicles. So can you just tell us a little bit about the work you could help, that you can do towards that?
Yeah, so similar to fleet moving from fossil fuels to electrification, so are buildings predominantly. They're going to have to move from fossil fuel boilers, so gas boilers predominantly, though believe it or not, there was still a coal boiler in the NHS not that long ago, which is quite shocking, really. And there's still oil boilers out there and oil backup generators. So moving away from those fossil fuels is paramount, but that's all going to be moved on to electricity. Hydrogen might have a very small role in some very specific areas, but hydrogen, in my opinion, is not the answer for buildings. So that's going to push up electricity demand. EV charging also pushes up electricity demand. And we know that there's constraints on the grid already, so district network operators have difficulty providing sites with enough electricity. So those two things have to be thought about together, because potentially otherwise you have a fleet decarb strategy moving to EVs that's upping your electricity, and you have a heat that's also, and if you don't think about them together.
So estates and fleet basically go hand in hand.
And this is, I guess, where it comes back to my interest in the people side of things. Traditionally, fleet and estate have had nothing to do with each other, apart from, I guess, where do you put the vehicles. But fleet and estate are going to have to work much more closely together to understand the kind of interconnectivities between this and manage electricity demand.
And I think you mentioned before about the importance of data to all this. So are you involved in collecting some of that data?
Yes, so as part of the guidance, we cover data from a sort of building perspective. Like handy things we've got on there is like a site information gathering template. So if you're not sure what information you should be gathering about your site, we've got a list that's quite helpful. So we do sort of basic stuff like that. The final theme in our guidance is around monitoring and verification. So once you've installed your low carbon technology, you really should be knowing the benefits of it, right? So making sure that it's delivering the benefits, making sure that if you were expecting to see cost savings, you're seeing them. And that can be quite complicated on a big estate. So data is kind of critical to that. And you should be planning data collection and monitoring into your approach from the very start. So our guidance tries to head off potential issues like that by kind of taking you through the process. On a more, I guess, exciting level, we've currently got a pilot with 70 NHS trusts. So these are acute hospital trusts where Energy Systems Catapult has got permission to pull in their live data. So we're pulling in their live half-hourly data into a data engine that we've built. Now, it is an innovation project, so we're sort of thinking about all the ways this could be used, but there's some really obvious...
Sorry, what kind of data are we talking about?
So we're talking about fiscal meter data, so the data that you pay your energy bill along. So most of those, well, most is probably an overstatement, those should be half-hour, they should be able to give you half-hourly data, those meters. If they're not, they're older meters and you should think about getting them upgraded. But we're pulling in that fiscal meter data. We're also collecting, if organisations have got a plan to decarbonise, we're collecting that plan so that we can see what they've got in the future that they want to do, and if they've done any projects like installed a heat pump or solar panels, we want that data as well so that we can start to see across a large number of similar estates the impact of these kind of interventions. Because one of the things we know that's also covered in the guidance, shameless plug, getting sign-off for these projects is really difficult. A lot of organisations have a high-level strategy that the organisation signed up to, but when it comes to taking a particular project forward, it's quite challenging, because that's when you're actually asking on the whole for money. So we're hoping that the kind of project with NHS England can help organisations understand where projects have worked previously and how well they've worked, and hopefully strengthen those business cases so that people can say, well, we've got evidence that in this type of estate, these kind of measures deliver these kind of benefits from real data. So yeah, it's really exciting.
So, confidence. How much confidence do you have that the NHS and various other blue lights services are going to meet their net zero targets?
I mean, I'm an optimist, so I think there's a few things in their favour. One is that the technology is on the whole available. Some of it needs to come down in cost. I think there's a huge amount of, very committed individuals, but I think we've got to reach beyond the traditional people that look at this, estate, sustainability, and work really hard to get everybody, and it sounds really cheesy, but everybody on board, because that's how you get the buy-in, that's how you get alignment with strategies, and that's how it becomes business as usual. Because at the moment, for too many organisations, sustainability is still sitting a little bit separately. It's not integrated into existing budgets. It's not integrated into existing governance processes. So these things need to be brought together. So, the building that you have now that you're going to have in 2050, you've got a long-term view on that.
Is that still the case, that basically sustainability is seen as the preserve of the sustainability managers as opposed to the organisations as a whole? Or is that changing now?
I think it's changing. I think it varies from organisation to organisation. And I think the one of the real struggles is that particularly people who work in estates, they have to deal with the day-to-day, keeping the buildings operational. And if you're ever at work and you've got to choose between an issue that's affecting you now, today, that maybe you didn't know about yesterday, and the long term, human nature is always that if you're under-resourced, you'll have to deal with the problem that's in front of you now. So I think, as well as funding, as in money to pay for measures, we need to think better about how we use our people resource to make sure that this longer term thinking is happening.
Okay, great. I think you've already given us your call to action, but if there are any final comments on that?
Yeah, so basically we've got loads of stuff on our website. We're constantly updating it and improving it. There's loads of guides on different topics: heat pumps, power purchase agreements, feasibility and design. There's calculators to help you work out your current carbon emissions and forward-looking costs. So please just go to the website. You have to put your details in once, just so that we can see who's downloading, and then it all opens up for you, and everything's free and downloadable. So please do go and check it out.
Great, thank you, Steph.
No problem.
We'll open up for a little bit of questioning time if anyone has a question. Yeah.
Getting a reputation now.
Sorry.
I was just interested in the from the East of England Ambulance Service. Interested in the NHS England project. What have you got any initial data, or do you know what the timeline is when you're expecting to get information? Yeah. You said it could potentially be some case studies, so you're getting the data presumably, and then looking at what estate projects presumably they're doing, and then seeing what the results are. So
yeah, so we've been collecting data, and hopefully in the next couple of months we'll be starting to put the first outputs out from the project. I'll add, if there's some way to send something, I'll add the link to our page on our website. But essentially, yeah, we'll be doing some comms around what we found. There's sort of two elements to what we found. There's what the actual data is about NHS estates, but there's also all the difficulties we've had in actually collecting it and pulling it in, which is nothing on data is ever as straightforward as you think it's going to be. So there's quite a lot of learning in that sort of category as well. But yeah, hopefully between now and Christmas we'll definitely be talking about what we've been finding. Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned was about the feasibility of meeting targets, and the costs were quite high. Could you give examples of what some of those costs are, like the big drivers, like 80-20 Pareto type examples?
I mean, it just varies so much from organisation to organisation, so it's difficult. I can give some examples where we've seen poor practice. So, for example, we've looked at heat decarbonisation plans in schools. Now, these varied in a small school from around £10,000 to maybe a multi-academy trust being about £80,000. But actually, we saw some for small schools that were close to £80,000, and the quality was no better than those at £10,000. So that's kind of a school level. I did a visit recently to Warwick University. They're drilling 2 test rigs for ground source heat pump. Those are costing close to £1 million each to dig those boreholes. If they're able to go ahead, they will be able to use those boreholes for the ground source heat pump, so they won't be lost. But if they're not able to go ahead, so it really is how big's a site and your project. We are trying to collect together data as part of this project and put out some cost benchmarks to help people engage better with the supply chain and sort of get rid of some of the costs that we know is in the system that shouldn't be. But yeah, that work will be between now and March, hopefully, but it's very difficult to get the cost data in.
Hi, Rebecca from Hampshire Constabulary. I've just got a question regarding the building resilience. You said about it's likely that we'd probably go mostly towards electricity as a whole.
So like boilers, everything. Just wondered about like the resilience side. So if there's like blackouts and things like that, would we be like, what's the factoring in for say like power generation and energy storage, and what's the because I know for say like our cars we need to have a backup of fuel. So if we've gone over to an electric fleet, like the backup for electric to then charge the cars, and so how do we factor in that sort of resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is particularly acute in blue lights and particularly in MOD. So it is something that really needs to be looked at on a site-by-site basis. I think electrical storage technology is kind of much earlier in the development than things like heat pumps. So I think there will be improvements in that kind of storage technology over time, because that, you're right, is probably going to be critical. I don't know whether on some sites you would probably still need fossil fuel backup generators. I think it depends on the size of the site and what you're running out of there. But yeah, obviously, as a sustainability professional, you need to maintain your credibility with the operational people you're talking to, and making sure that they understand that the show's got to go on, right? People have got to be able to use these buildings and the fleet. So yeah, it is a really important consideration. I don't have a specific answer, but yeah, I can see a place where you probably would still have to have fossil fuel backup.
So I'm from a company called Next Gen BPS, and we work heavily in the film and TV market. So making feature films, and we supply cameras and lighting, etc., etc. So I've been supplying battery power to the film studios and film hire companies and all the rest over the last 4 years. So we've now got a situation of we can store power, it can last for a long time, and the one great answer is everyone has a roof. So we have solar panels charging small little units, and we're able to keep that sustainability right down to free power now. So we've just brought out this morning, there's been a report which would be of great interest to you, which has been backed by Netflix and Sky, going through the whole film industry, where it would fit and how it can to cut down emissions and to cut down fuel wastage, etc., etc. So that's come out today. I'll give you the information on that. It's a good read. But basically, it looks like the way the construction industry is going and the film TV industry, AV market and all the rest is going at the moment, is battery power. But we've now, it's safe battery power. We've got to be very careful on what manufacturers you use and certificates for these machines, etc., etc. So we have 3 units throughout the show, and now we're starting to educate in a nice way the blues and twos and all the rest as to what battery power can do. And the solution it gives is fantastic. Also, it's not a crazy cost. We've got pricing down, so that makes it just very acceptable and easy to everybody. We've so maybe we could have a chat and I'll explain to you a bit more. But if anyone's interested in a bit of information about battery power, I'm more than happy to help. All right.
Maybe just if we can just have a few comments just about your kind of next steps in this guidance and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure.
At Energy Systems Catapult.
Yeah, so at the moment we're funded until the end of this financial year. So obviously discussions with new government will happen over the sort of spring period. But yeah, a few things that we've got in the pipeline coming out is we have a guide around heat networks that's in the pipeline. We also have guidance on flexibility and storage technologies. So that is quite weighty, but should be coming out soon. I mentioned the cost work, so really trying to pull together that cost data and try and help the sector understand what things should cost. The other area that we're starting to look at is training and support. So there's a number of providers that provide relevant courses for public sector people like the Energy Institute, the Energy Managers Association, APSI, who focus more on local authorities. But the market and the offering is vast and a bit fragmented. So we're having a think about if we can do some work around skills and training to sort of bring that together and sort of help the public sector navigate that training offer, because consistently in the work we do with public sector organisations, people say they need upskilling, their colleagues need upskilling, they need to learn more about this topic so that they can, make the right decisions. So those are some of the areas that we're looking at.
Fabulous. Let's just give a quick round of applause to Steph.
Thanks for listening. If you like this session, then be sure to browse the rest of the programme for the show. Share the link and subscribe to receive updates on new content from us here at Emergency Services Times.